As I stood in the front row, I gazed at my sword. The edge of the sword was a little worn from daily practice, and I'd sharpened the blade as best I could, but it wasn't exactly the sort of weapon I wanted to use in battle. Even though I had grown used to it, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been blessed by a sword that wasn't right for me. My sword was light, and while it was easy to handle, it wasn't especially strong. If you tried to go full speed on it, your arm would tire quickly, and if you went for an attack with all your might, you'd have to take care not to overreach, or you'd end up injuring yourself. As a swordsman, my greatest advantage was that I was quick. I could tell right away when someone else's sword was coming for me. In terms of pure speed, I'd say my sword was around the same speed as my opponent's, and yet I could do things that even my opponent couldn't. That's why I didn't have any problem with my sword. The one thing that bothered me was my sword's size and weight. It felt like a sword for children or women. It was hard to believe that this was my weapon, a weapon meant for defeating people in battle. And yet, despite that, I was still able to cut down more than 10 enemies with my sword in a single day. There was no doubt about it. My sword was one of the strongest swords around. Even so, it was my weakness. The difference between me and the enemy was my speed and ability to dodge attacks. A normal enemy might be able to defeat me. However, with a sword that could match my skill, I'd be able to keep them at a distance until reinforcements arrived. My opponent was someone who had fought more than 20 battles and won each of them. He knew that no matter how fast he was, he'd never be able to defeat me head-on. So he decided to attack me indirectly. If I was going to lose, then he wanted me to lose in the way that was most advantageous to him. He would use his superior strength and speed to win the battle, while I would have to do everything I could to escape. In this battle, he was the one who could control the flow of the fight. I could only hope to avoid being controlled. It was a game of wits. We would have to try and guess what the other was thinking. That was the strategy he had chosen for the day's training. I sat on the floor, my back against the wall of the dojo. As I waited, I pulled my short sword out of its sheath and held it before me. The enemy walked into the dojo and sat down a short distance away from me. I could feel his eyes on me. "I've heard that you were the only person to defeat 15 of us in one day," he said. I nodded. Yes, but I don't want anyone else to know that. Why's that? I don't want people to call me strong. I don't want people to see me as better than they are. I looked at him and waited for his response. If you want to win, he said, you're going to have to try harder. I know, I replied. I'd already done all I could in order to get ready for battle. I'd sharpened my sword and hone my skill with it to the highest level possible. The only thing left for me to do was try harder than my opponent. I needed to do more than he did. I needed to be more prepared. The world is changing, he said. I know. When you were born, the world was a simple place. There were clear rules, and we knew our place in society. He looked out the window. Then he continued. Then, along came the Church of the Three Heroes. And since then, the world has changed in 100 different ways. I'd heard that the church had a huge influence on the world. Apparently, it had become the center of the world's economic system. The church controls the world, he continued. The church says that we should use reason to govern our lives. I don't see the need to go around making trouble, I said. The reason for everything is that everyone is trying to be better than everyone else. He paused. But it isn't enough for people to simply do their best. If you're going to be a ruler, you have to have a goal in mind. Otherwise, your people will look down on you. I looked at him curiously, but he said nothing more. That's why, he said, I think that the Church of the Three Heroes has the wrong idea about how to control people. He continued, people want to be stronger than others. They want to have a sense of purpose, something that will give their lives meaning. I nodded. That's what makes them human, he continued. When we're born, we don't know anything about who we are, and we're given only one thing, our own existence. He stood up and paced the room, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked like a teacher lecturing a class of students. If you don't have a reason to live, then you're just like a lifeless doll, acting on instinct. He stopped walking and turned toward me. That's why people look for something greater than themselves, something to fight for. He looked at me with those cold, blue eyes and smiled. In that way, they're no different from wild beasts or wild birds. People aren't different from those things in terms of their basic instincts. I remained silent, listening to what he had to say. I knew he was right, even if I didn't want to admit it. You should try to think of some sort of goal for yourself. He took his hand off his sword and pointed to my short sword. You should try to find something you can fight for. He raised his sword high above his head and slammed it down on the floor with a great shout. For example, this sword. He kicked the sword out of my hand, and it fell to the floor with a loud clang. He bent down and picked it up. This sword was forged by my ancestors. It is passed down from generation to generation, passed down to me. My ancestor's name is engraved on this blade. The blood of my ancestors runs through this sword. I stared at the blade with its fine white markings and tried to imagine who it might have once belonged to, but I couldn't remember any names. This sword is proof of my ancestry and my right to rule. He laughed. Without it, I'd be nothing. I was quiet and did not respond. My ancestors were warriors who fought bravely in many battles, he said. And even though their homeland was conquered by someone else, they didn't surrender. They fought on and managed to retain their freedom. He stood up and looked at me again. There was one among my ancestors who was especially good at fighting. He continued. He was so good, in fact, that he became famous. And in the end, he was betrayed by his own people. And when his enemies captured him, they put his head on a pike and paraded through the streets, proclaiming how they would make an example of him so that no one would dare betray them. What happened after that? I asked. His son took up where his father had left off and continued to fight. The son also became a famous warrior, but he didn't have the same luck as his father. His enemies captured him as well and made him suffer greatly before putting him on the same pike as his father. He took a step toward me. There's only one way to ensure you'll never be betrayed, and that is to never trust anyone. He stepped away again and looked down at me. The first person you have to trust in life is yourself. He took a deep breath and continued. People need something to fight for in order to be motivated. That's why they'll try so hard to accomplish their goals, no matter how difficult they are. In order for someone to reach their full potential, they need someone to inspire them. He looked at me. You should do whatever you can to find that inspiration, he said. Don't be like me, a man who is nothing more than an empty shell. I looked up at him, confused. He walked back and forth in front of me. The church is very powerful, and it has the support of most people in society. He stopped pacing and looked out the window. The sunlight had dimmed considerably, but there was still enough light to see his profile as he continued. But don't let that fool you, he said. You can always find your own way forward even when everything around you is falling apart. He turned around to face me. And don't make the mistake that so many people make and try to take responsibility for everyone around you. I was silent. He walked over and pulled out his short sword from the sheath at his waist and handed it to me. This sword is yours, he said. You should fight for it. I took the sword from him and held it before me. It felt lighter than it looked. The perfect balance between weight and strength. As long as you hold on to the sword, he continued, you'll never lose your way. I nodded and stared down at the sword. Thank you. He smiled at me. Just don't forget that you have to fight for your own goals as well. And he walked out of the dojo. I thought about what he'd said. It wasn't very helpful, but I didn't expect much from him anyway. He was just a teacher. As I looked down at the sword in my hand, I realized that there was a name engraved on its hilt, just as he had said. I wonder what it means, I said quietly to myself.